Well, hello again, ladies and gentlemen. This is your friend Noe. I felt it was time to sit down and bring you another video. Today, I want to talk about prayers. Over the years, I have seen a lot go on with people. I have heard them get very discouraged and openly mad at God because they claim that their prayers are not answered. But I think first we have to understand what prayers are about and how God sees our prayers. So in starting this, I want you to understand yes, I do believe God answers prayers. But he may not answer them the way we want him to answer them. They're going to be answered in his way. So, and what do I mean by that? It reminds me of a time many years ago when I was at a church. And I was there on a Wednesday evening prayer meeting. And now, I am one that believes in what the Bible says about go into the closet and pray to God. It's between you and God. This open air, sitting in big circles, praying openly amongst these people, I don't quite agree with that. But that's neither here nor there. And what surprised me that night, this was back when Obama was going to give us Obamacare. And it came to a deacon's wife, and part of her prayer was that the government pass government-run health care. Now, I understood, and I know this family, and I know her husband, the deacon, and I know how they are, but that's neither here nor there. But I also understood and knew that the selfishness in that prayer was not for how this government-run healthcare would affect and destroy millions of people's lives. People lost their health care, people lost they were losing their homes and stuff because, to give you an idea, if my wife and I would have signed on to this craziness, it would have cost us $620 a month for a premium with a $12,000 out-of-pocket expense per year. So when you total that up, that would have been $20,000 per year that we would have had to pay just to have this government-run health care. The selfishness in this deacon's wife's prayer was that she was looking for a free health care for her and her family. So that's what surprised me the most, is that how could she wasn't thinking about the people that there was no possible way they could afford this, and it wasn't health care. It was no health care. But all she was doing was praying for herself. Selfishness. That's the biggest problem when it comes to a lot of people praying today. It's selfishness. Now, I know that when I was sick here a few years back, when this lung problem first hit, I had hundreds and hundreds of people all around America and Canada and even in other countries praying for me. And I feel that their prayers were answered and God put me back on my feet. But he put me back on my feet for a reason. And I had to accept that reason, that what I do here now for all of you is the main reason why God keeps me going today. And I will accept that. And I will understand that this is for God's glory, not for mine. But when our many of you newer subs and stuff may not know that my wife and I did lose a son at 2 years old. And a lot of people over the years since that happened 25 years ago, how can you believe in God? Look what God did. Look how God took your son, and look how God made him suffer. But I have to explain to them and tell them there's a lot more to it than what they're seeing. At this time, when my son was alive, I was not following God the way God wanted me to follow him. I was not doing for God the way God wanted me to do things for him. I was leading my own life, and my own life was not leading down a righteous path. It was very self-serving and selfish and egotistical and ignorant and many, you name it. That's where I was. I had my reasons. I was very jaded from my past, and I just didn't see the truth for what the truth was. But once my son did pass away, a lot of truth came into play. A lot of truth. The poem that my aunt held on to after my uncle had passed away never would have come to me if it was not for the events that led up to her understanding what that poem said. And it ends up that our son, even though for the short 2 years that he lived and was on this earth, the good that the people's hearts that he touched, the visiting nurses, our family, different friends and stuff, and was a blessing. And once I received that poem from my aunt, it all made sense to me. The poem talked about it was a gift from God. He was a gift. God needed the parents who would make this child's life content. This child would be known as handicapped, and this child would not be as normal children are. But we were asked to do a job for God, and we did that job. So it brought me back around. It brought me out of my selfish being and my self-centeredness, and it put me back onto a path where God wanted me to be. I knew at that time it was time for me to understand the Bible, understand God's Word for what God's Word is truly. So that's what He gave me. God gave me that understanding. And now for that understanding, I will do more work for God by bringing that understanding to you all. So when it comes to prayers, what I have heard come from many people today, it's kind of disturbing at times, because I hear people, oh, I've prayed for this and I've prayed for that, and it doesn't come true. And here again, I don't think they quite understand how God works. We do understand, and I do know that our churches of today do teach and preach that, oh, you pray and God answers your prayer. And so people are thinking, well, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to pray for $1 million and God's going to give me $1 million. What they're not looking at is what's in their heart. Why do you want that $1 million? Is it because you want material things for yourself? You want the best car in the neighborhood? You want the best house in the neighborhood? Is this the reason why? Is it for selfish reasons? I will tell you right now, excuse me. I will tell you right now, if the reasoning behind your prayer is for selfish reasons, chances are God's not going to answer that prayer. As that deacon's wife prayed that night for government-run health care, I don't think she understood exactly what it was. Her prayer was not answered because it was going to be rammed through our government anyway, because there was an alternative motive behind it. And a couple of years later, I think she understood, and they realized that government-run health care is no health care. Her husband had back problems, but there was no health care to heal his back problem. There was a temporary, the only thing that the health care plan that they had would cover is a temporary pain management regime, and that was it. That's all they would pay for. If the procedure that he needed was not covered, they would have had to come up with thousands and thousands of dollars to have that back problem taken care of in his back. So she got her wish. She got her government-run health care. It just wasn't what she thought it was going to be. And I see that with many people today. But when it came to my son and all the prayers and everything my wife had gone through and did to heal my son, we had to look at the bigger picture when it was done. We know that God took our son home to be with him. He was innocent. He was sinless. He was too young to know the depths of evil. And we understand that these children are brought back to God. But for the time that they are here on earth, God needs the correct parents to do a job for him. And we did that job. And I learned a lot since then about God. So when it comes to prayers, God's not going to answer prayers the way you think he may. He's going to look at your heart. Is your prayers for selfish reasons? If you look through the Bible, when many of times that people prayed and these prayers were answered, what were these prayers for? These prayers were for other people. There are some explanations of prayers for a certain person that have come true. Like King David. When King David realized that he had lost his way and he was not doing for Israel what God wanted for Israel, he had to bow down and humble himself before God, and his prayer was simple. Would you please make me the man that I once was? So it was a healing for himself, for his sinful ways in life, that he was praying to God to heal him of those discrepancies, and to heal the land, and to not hold Israel accountable for his iniquities, but to hold him accountable. He was willing to suffer and sacrifice his life, his well-being, his easy living, in order for Israel as a nation to be healed and to have prosperity once again. And God obliged. So in our world of today, we really need to look at what are the basis in our prayer. What's it for? If we're praying for ourselves, is it for our wants and our desires? Or is it for help me so I can continue to help others. I ask God a lot these days that I just cannot catch my breath. I can't breathe, and help me through this. Heal this time in me, because I need to continue to work on this house and protect my family and help my family, and all that I do for my family that, I know that it's hard for them because they don't have the skills and the trades that I have. My boys don't. They're working on it, and it takes time to accumulate all this. But in the meantime, I need to be here. I need to fix the things that have gone wrong in the house, or this electrical problem needs to be fixed, and these receptacles that are 50 years old need to be swapped out, and the carpenter work on the house needs to be taken care of, and different things like that. But while I'm doing this, they're learning, and I'm teaching them what I'm doing and how I'm doing it and the reason I'm doing it. And that's why I ask God to help me, keep me going, even though the suffering at times is very hard. I will say that. And it's not for pity, it's not for nothing. It's so you understand how prayers work. I understand my suffering, as I've always said, is justified for who I was as a young man, and things that I have done in my past and the way I was in my past. My suffering is well justified in the eyes of God. But people can change. So, for you to understand, I have this little story I want to tell about prayer to help you understand more of what I'm saying. There's these two men, and they're on a boat. These two men have been acquaintances, and they've known each other for many years, and they always argue with each other about who is more in God's favor. Now, this one night, their ship that they're on hits rocks or whatever, but there's a shipwreck, and the ship is destroyed and sunk. And these two men wake up on an island. And of course, true to form with them, they continue to argue over who is in more favor of God, which one God favors more. So they decide, you go to that side of the island and I'm going to stay on this side of the island. And through our prayers, we will learn who God favors more. So the first man, that first night, he prays for provisions, food or whatever, to sustain his life. And the next morning, wow, look at all that washed up. All this food, all these provisions, and everything has washed up on the shore. So he congregates it all together and he packs it away. I need a nice shelter. That's what I need. I need a real nice shelter. So he prays to God again. And the next morning, all this wood and this stuff and everything to build a nice shelter shows up on the shoreline. And so he builds his shelter, and he's curious. So he sneaks over and he peers over into the other side of the island. And he sees his acquaintance over there that, doesn't seem to have many provisions, and he's got this little half lean-to shelter, and that's all he seems to have. And so the guy feels pretty good about himself. He goes back to his side of the island, and, well, as time goes on, he's getting lonely. So he prays to God for a companion. And, wow, to his amazement, the next morning, this woman has washed ashore. So he helps her up and brings her to his shelter, and then of course he's got to pray for more provisions so they both have enough. And sure enough, the next morning those provisions are right there on the shore, and it's like, wow. So he's really surprised that this is happening. So as time goes on, he decides, we need a better shelter, a bigger one, more comfortable for the both of us. And he prays for it, and sure enough, the next morning there's all this extra provisions and wood and material on the shoreline that he can collect and make a nice, better shelter for himself. And he's curious how his acquaintance is doing. So of course he sneaks up and he looks over and he sees the man looks pretty distraught. But, he still has a few provisions, and he's collecting a few things that he needs to live, and he still has his little tiny lean-to for a covering, and, he doesn't quite look like he's doing very well. So the guy is really, really happy with himself now, and he goes back down. And, well, as time goes on a little bit more, him and his female companion decide they want to live their life in society with the rest of the people, and so he prays for them to be rescued. Well, lo and behold, in a couple days, there's a ship has showed up to rescue them off in their island. So as he is heading for the rescue boat, he hears a voice. What about your friend on the other side of the island? And the man, why? Why would I go and tell him? Clearly, God favors me more than God favors him. God has answered all of my prayers. Anything I prayed for, God has awarded me with and given to me and presented me with. And the voice replied, that's not necessarily true. For he only prayed one prayer, and that prayer was that all of your prayers come true. So you see the moral of that story, ladies and gentlemen. The guy who was selfish thought he was in God's favor, not realizing the man on the other side of the island that was suffering and sacrificing was the one truly in God's favor, because he didn't pray for himself, he prayed for the other man. So this is how we have to be in our life today. If we're praying for our nation to be healed, are we praying for our nation to be healed so our lives will be better and our lives will be easier and we don't have to sacrifice and we can continue being our selfish ways? Or are we truly asking God to heal this nation for the good of everybody, so that they can have a better life and their suffering can go away, and better means at that point of what's going on, and their children will, this indoctrination and this poisoning of our minds and our food and our atmosphere, that all this can go away. Is that the true reason you want our nation to be healed in your prayers? Or is it on a selfish note? It's so that your life will be easier and more secure. Because I will tell you, God knows what's in your heart. God knows the true meaning behind your prayers. So the next time you sit down to pray, I want you to think about that. I want you to think about, is it truly for you? Or is it truly for the betterment of all of mankind? These are answers that we have to ask ourselves. I'm not saying you can't pray for yourself, but understand that for that prayer to be answered, it just may not be answered in the way you want it to be answered or how you think it will be answered. There's many different ways that God will deal with this. So I hope this helps in a more understanding way in these times that we are in. So until next time, ladies and gentlemen, this is No Way Out.